Howdy, welcome to Hang the Critic with Josh Ball. I am Josh Ball and this is Hang the Critic.
You are nailing this.
This is the third part, as promised, of talk about adaptations. This part will focus on the legacy of books and films. The films that are made of the books, obviously. Talking about adaptations. Go! In many cases, a film version of a book can be arguably more well-known or popular than the book version of the book. A clear example of that is the work of Walt Disney. You might say to someone, do you know the story of Rapunzel? And they might say, what, you mean Tangled? No, Rapunzel. You might say to someone, do you know the story of the Snow Queen? And they'll say, what, you mean The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? And you say, no, Frozen. I mean, no, the Snow Queen. I have actually met people who have never heard of The Jungle Book, the film The Jungle, any of the films of The Jungle Book, let alone the fact that The Jungle Book is based, as the name would suggest, on a book by Rudyard Kipling. And if you're one of the people who weren't aware of that, here's another thing that you probably weren't aware of. The version of The Jungle Book that Disney did in the 1960s was so far gone from its source material that the filmmakers actually had to stop themselves and go, do we have any right giving this the credit of being based on the book by Rudyard Kipling? And that, and this is a true fact, was the first use of the credit inspired by the books by Rudyard Kipling, or just inspired by as a thing by itself. And one signature example of the many, many differences that Disney made to that source material, King Louie, who is possibly one of the most popular characters in the Jungle Book, who is definitely the best song, in my opinion, wasn't in the book at all. It was completely absent. And it's fairly easy to tell because orangutans are the only animals in the Jungle Book that aren't native to India. King Louie was actually a caricature of the voice actor. His name was Louis Prima, or Prima. In fact, later on, after he had passed away, Disney got into a legal dispute with his widow for using his, persona as King Louie in later projects.
You got me hooked. Reel me in.
The Jungle Book is an example of a film adaptation that gains its own life, It goes beyond just being considered an adaptation of the source material. It is a new breeding thing in of itself. And that goes for most of Disney's productions. They're no longer, for example, P.L. Travers' Mary Poppins. They're Disney's Mary Poppins. And in a way, that's a sad thing to happen. But in some ways, I think it reinforces that notion of there's separate things. The book can still have that reputation, have its own sort of breathing space from the film. They can be very separate and distinct things, and people can appreciate the book for these reasons, they can appreciate the film for those reasons, and I love that. For example, The Shining. The Shining is a highly praised movie amongst filmmakers. Stanley Kubrick, in my opinion, largely deserves all the credit that he gets. And The Shining is a brilliant work of tension building and creating a creepy and dramatic atmosphere. And in my opinion, The Shining is a brilliant movie. I really enjoy it. Stephen King did not. I have never read The Shining. I will do. I promise, at some point in the future. I may discuss that in another video, who knows, it could happen. I am told that the film version of The Shining differs from the book in many key areas, particularly the ending. Apparently, Stephen King wasn't a fan of the casting of Jack Nicholson. I love Jack Nicholson. He is a brilliant actor. I love him in everything that he's ever done, ever. But he is very well known for playing psychotic people, and part of the point of Jack Torrance in The Shining is that you're not supposed to expect this kind of psychotic behavior from him, and that's part of the horror that someone who's seemingly just your everyday dad is capable of great violence and horrifying behavior, which is something that people have come to expect from Jack Nicholson. the characters that he plays. I mean, not from Jack Nicholson himself.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
And now for something completely different.
Then we go into a whole other area, a whole other realm, and it is the realm of unadaptable novels. But to go into unadaptable novels, you have to ask yourself the question, what makes these novels arguably unadaptable? Sometimes it's just because they're far too long, or there's far too much information and detail to cover. And you can get around that sometimes by making it into a television series, or in dividing it up into a series of films. But that opens up a whole other area of issues. Sometimes it's the way the narrative plays out. The structure of the narrative is something that doesn't fit comfortably with traditional filmmaking. But some filmmakers have cleverly decided to combat that by using untraditional filmmaking, experimental writing interpreted in experimental filmmaking. Tristram Shandy. It's a book in many volumes, and it's the story of the life of a fictional person whose name is Tristram Shandy. And it's less of a story of someone's life and more about how life is very non-linear. Life isn't a book narrative or a film narrative. It is very random. For example, you're never going to encounter a conversation in a film that is completely irrelevant. Every conversation furthers the plot or the characters in some way. But in life, people have irrelevant conversations all the time. You know, life is made of irrelevant conversations. In Tristram Shandy, he's trying to tell the story of his life, but he keeps on getting distracted by details that lead him on different tangents. It's volumes and volumes before he's even born. But the dynamic trio of Michael Winterbottom, director, and stars Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon came together to make the film Tristram Shandy, A Cock and Bull Story, or if you're in the UK, just A Cock and Bull Story, which is not an adaptation of the book, but it technically is. Like, it's very strange. And it's a film about a crew that are attempting to make a film adaptation of Tristram Shandy. And it gets lost and confused along the way in the way that the book does. It has snippets of moments and elements from the book, but it doesn't in any way follow the plot of the book itself. That's an example of a film that's keeping true to the themes of the book as opposed to the plot, which I think is a fascinating experiment in filmmaking and adaptation. It harkens back to the filmmakers choosing for themselves what's important. And in this case, it's choosing between the direct adaptation of the narrative and getting all the beats and moments down, or is it more important to express the theme and the concepts of the book and what the book is trying to get across, which is, I think, it is a fascinating area that is intended probably for a much bigger brain than me. Anyway, Tristram Shandy, A Cock and Bull Story, also good if you just want to see Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon riffing off each other. The Trip movies, also good for that.
Sleep well, my brother. Sleep well, my sister, but please do not sleep with my sister.
Leave my sister out of it, all right?
Sister alone.
That's all we got. That is the end of part 3 of my 3-part adaptations series, but it is not the end of Bang the Critic. I'm thinking of doing a review list in the future, and it's going to be a list about underrated directors. So make sure to join me then. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment about, what your opinion on adaptations, or what your favorite adaptation is, or anything like that. Anything about adaptations, or anything not about adaptations, Just talk about random shit. Who knows? I don't care. Until then, keep watching movies, and I'll see you when I see you.
landing. Bravo!